Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first Tales from Tech Support story of the day comes from Lorix in Oz, when a new IT department head steals the prestige email address from a longtime employee and lives to regret it. A number of years back, I was working for a company that had been around for many years. I was only relatively new myself, but there were still a couple old guard senior engineers around who had been there from the start. The kind that knows where all the obscure undocumented insider stuff is and can fix most problems in 5 seconds, whereas it might take the rest of us hours to solve. One of the guys in particular, who I shall refer to as Joe, a bearded and jovial gent with a very Steve Wozniak persona, was always happy for us to approach him with our questions. He welcomed us to leverage his vast knowledge of how the company's sprawling IT infrastructure worked. It made our lives easier and helped us cope with the constant, unrealistic expectations of upper management. He was a real old-school engineer, someone who loved their job and was well respected by everyone around the department. So, when his friend, the current department head, a man of comparable knowledge and experience, retired and was replaced from the outside with a young and brash one with a business degree and little technical knowledge who was also called Joe, it was a big change for everyone. Fortunately for us, he didn't interfere too much with the technical aspects of our day-to-day jobs, at least at first. When the company first started out, they weren't too concerned with formality when it came to email address policy. In later years, as the company had grown, they tightened the bolts with an official policy of issuing staff with a more formal address of firstname.lastname@department.countrycode.company.com. But those who were around from the early days retained their original name@company.com addresses as an alias. It was somewhat of a status symbol and sign of authority in the company to have one of those, and those that did would use that version as their sending address and proudly have it in their email signatures and on their business cards. The retired head had one such address, as did Joe, in the form of joe@company.com. And you always knew when you saw an email come into the inbox from somebody with one of those addresses that they were someone important who had been around for a while. Most of the department heads were long-term employees who had used them, and it wasn't long before the new IT head noticed this aspect of our corporate culture and clearly envied his peers. But as a new employee, he was stuck with his formal email address, and they weren't issuing new legacy email addresses of this kind unless they were for someone way up the food chain. Even as head of IT, he had no authority to claim one, which is why when one day he spotted an email from Joe using his legacy address, he saw an opportunity to get what he was coveting. So, as the tale goes, he called Joe into his office and had an exchange that went something like this. "Hey Joe, great work on the capacity report and getting it to me so quickly. We should be able to get approval from finance to expand our storage way sooner than I thought." "Not a problem. Is there anything else you needed from me for it?" "Nope, everything is there, thanks. But I happened to notice when you sent it through, you were using an email address a little different from the rest of the team." "Yes, that's the one I've always used from when I started, and everyone here knows to reach me at. Also, some of our older systems and scripts we still use from the early days were hard-coded to use it as well. So I'm still actively using it to get critical alerts. I've also got rules set up to forward them onto the relevant team addresses we use these days, since the only alternative is to budget a major project to go through all our legacy stuff to change it, and we were never able to get approval for that with everything else going on around here." "I've got no problem with it, but I was interested in getting one of these kind of addresses for me. It would make it easier for people to, know I'm the head of the department rather than just another employee here. My predecessor had one, so it should be no problem for me to have one as well too, right? Can you make that happen?" "I'm sorry, I wish I could, but it's HR that makes that decision, and it's their policy to only issue personal addresses at the top corporate domain level now for C-level recruits and their immediate assistants." "You've been here a long time. Surely there's a way or someone you know who can make this happen." "I'm sorry, it's a decision way above my pay grade. I'd be happy to put a request in for you to the head of HR to see if they could do it as a favor, but I'm pretty certain what their answer will be." "Okay, Thanks. Do it and let's see what happens. Joe goes and logs the request, but of course the head of HR knocks it back, citing policy and not wanting to set a precedent, even as a favor to Joe. Joe goes back to give the IT head the bad news. Hey, you know that request I put through to try and get you a top-level email address? Unfortunately, HR have knocked it back. I did my best to try and push it through, but they were very firm on our current corporate policy of not issuing any new ones, except for those at the very top. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you sure you did everything you could? Yes, it's out of either of our hands, unfortunately. Fine then. And Joe was right. There was no way the IT head was going to be issued with a brand new personal address. However, his position did allow him to authorize the reassignment of existing email addresses to staff, which was normally used to forward mail and alerts still being sent internally to staff who had left the company. He soon realized this was possible and formed a plan, calling Joe back into his office for another conversation. Hey Joe, you know how we can't get new personal email addresses created, but we can still reassign an existing one into my name, right? We can do that, yes. You have the authority to have the email address of anyone who has left or assigned to anyone else if you so wish. Did you want your predecessor's address? I mean, we can do it, but it would confuse a lot of people if they saw your email coming from someone who is gone. What about email addresses of existing staff? You do have the authority, but it would still confuse people and you would be getting all the legacy alerts and notifications, which would make you responsible for ensuring they flow through to the right people when they arrive. I think I can handle forwarding a couple lousy emails whenever I see them. I have a greater need for visibility here, and there is no business requirement for you to have one. So start the process of transferring joe@company.com across to me immediately. Let me know once it's done so I can let everyone know. So poor Joe was forced to dig his own grave and give up the email address he had held since day one. He definitely wasn't happy about it, but did as he was instructed. Falling back on his regular corporate address, he sent an email out to the immediate team and his contacts to let them know what was happening, and to please use his full address moving forward to contact him. At the same time, the IT head proudly sent out a company-wide email broadcast, letting everyone know that his email address had been updated and could now be reached at joe@company.com as the head of IT. Weeks went by, and it was clear he was taking every opportunity to send out emails using his new address. New stationery was issued, along with business cards clearly showing his position and contact address. He was reveling in having a coveted address and the prestige and recognition it instantly gave him, especially when dealing with other offices and people who didn't know he was only a relative newcomer. Life was good. That is, until one fateful morning when he wasn't in his office browsing Facebook like he usually would be doing when everyone else arrived. Turned out, he had forgotten about his responsibility to forward through important notifications when they came through to him. He had set up a rule to handle them, sure, but not to forward them as promised, but instead deleting them directly from his inbox without notice. One particular alert dealt with backup failures for a particularly important and long-term defense contract. One of our key SLAs was to ensure daily incremental and weekly full backups being performed on one of these old legacy systems that Joe had mentioned to him, both verbally and in writing. The media in an old backup unit had failed and was repeatedly notifying the issue. It was normally a simple fix: replace the faulty media in the backup unit and restart a full backup run. But with no alerts being sent through, nobody knew there was a problem. So when a request came through from the client to perform a restore of the previous week's data after an accidental deletion, that backup team found, to their horror, that no backups had been running for the past several weeks and the data had been lost. The client was not amused. The CEO, with whom they had a close relationship with, was even less so. The IT head attempted to throw Joe under the bus when word came down that the company was going to incur a massive rebate for the SLA breach, but Joe, in his wisdom, had ensured he had done a complete CYA when handing over his email address, including email exchanges with the IT head, highlighting the importance of the alerts, and to ensure that they went to the right people, including detailed instructions on how to set up forwarding rules and where to send them. All completely ignored. HR policy was specific when it came to important email. It was the clear responsibility of the recipient to ensure they were handled accordingly, and the IT head had clearly failed his responsibilities. He didn't last probation and was gone within the next month. Everyone was wondering who we would be getting in the position next. HR and management were light-tipped on the topic, and there was plenty of speculation within the department about what might happen next. But everyone was smiling when they walked in on Monday to see Joe sitting in the IT head office. In the wake of what happened, management decided in their wisdom that the IT department should have a head who actually knew something about IT. Joe hung on for a few more years before retiring or moving on, but during his tenure, he was one of the best IT managers I have ever worked for, and the position didn't change him from being the friendly, helpful, and supportive teacher that he was. I was sad to see him go, but while he was still with us, I always smiled when I saw his emails coming through to us from the old, friendly address of joe@company.com, which he had reclaimed and been returned to its rightful owner. I'm glad everything worked out in the end. I know the original Joe must have felt pretty horrible getting his email stripped away. I mean, imagine if YouTube was like, yeah, so we want your username, so you can have this new one and you can't pick it and it looks awful. Let's just say I would not be very happy. Our next story comes from Electrical Modes. Guy who lied on his CV. We had a guy join our IT team. There was only 5 of us for a company of about 1,000 around the country. He was meant to be an escalation point for myself and other members, so we didn't have to go so high up for help. The dude was so bad, I couldn't believe it. He didn't understand how Active Directory or Microsoft 365 or anything worked. He's shipping out laptops without power supplies, he's setting up phones without MDM on them, he's creating accounts on the wrong domain, he spent like a day changing the settings on an iPad so it looks pretty and easy for the users, despite our guide telling us to standardize as much as possible to provide easier support. Anyway, this is the funniest one. A user had a problem with her printer, so he went to the user and checked on her PC. He decided to reset her PC immediately. Slightly disgruntled, the user logs back in an hour later, and the printer is still not working. She politely logged a ticket asking for help. He walks over there and tells her she doesn't know what she's talking about and that she's not IT. He checks the printer, no messages. He checks the PC, nothing. He resets the PC again, walks away, and leaves for the day. He leaves a note in the ticket saying that he has reset the PC and that the user is annoying? WTF. The user still can't print the next day, at which point he escalates it backwards to me? He is meant to be senior to me by about $15,000. I go to fix it, and it turns out the user had just been selecting the wrong printer, as our printers are not easy to identify by names. I selected the right one, pressed print, and it was successful. She then asked about her Acrobat Pro, which I had to reinstall, reset her account password and login. Some macros for Excel needed to be set up. She spent the rest of her day getting her bookmarks back and getting the PC back to how she liked it. I felt bad for her, but at least she hadn't saved work on the C drive because he just wiped it without even asking her. I feel like the guy in this story is just the type of person you really wonder how they actually got their job. He seems closer to one of those online tech support scammers than someone who can actually solve problems. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I'll see you in the next video.